I'm John Byrne with AML RightSource. With me today, joining us again, is Ari Redbord. Ari is the Global Head of Policy and Government Affairs at TRM Labs. He's been kind enough to join us, as I say, for a second time, and for a couple of things that we want to talk to him about today. One is TRM Labs last month issued their 2024 annual crypto crime report, which is must read for all of us in the AML financial crime crypto space. So I'm going to talk to him about that. And then there's a number of things with the new administration regarding cryptocurrency. We want to get his take on that and recommendations for all of us in the financial crime space, what we should be watching for going forward. So Ari, first of all, thank you so much for taking the time today. Really appreciate it.
John, thank you for having me. You are a stalwart in this space and someone I've admired for a long time. So it's an honor to again join you for the podcast.
Yeah, thanks so much. So let's first talk about TRM's crypto crime report for 2024. There's a whole series of categories in there that I want you to go through, and the categories that you cover are things that are very relevant to our world: sanctions and scams and frauds and terrorist financing, ransomware, illicit drug, all those things that are obviously very important to the AML professional out there. Start off with the big picture and give us some of basically the headlines from the report.
No, I really appreciate it. And this is essentially a teaser. We do have the report coming out over the course of the next few weeks, but we really kind of wanted to get these numbers out so folks could use them, in making, informed policy decisions. Look, we continue to see the overall illicit crypto volume as a tiny percent of sort of overall activity. It has dropped about 50%. We saw about 0.8% of all volume was illicit last year. This year, we see about 0.4% of overall crypto transactions are illicit. Again, a 50% decrease from last year, which is very telling. What we're seeing is volumes go up in the crypto space. Crypto transaction volume grew to over 10.6 trillion this year. That's up about 56% from 2023, but illicit volume dropped to about 45 billion, which is about 0.4% of overall activity. So that's sort of the biggest takeaway here. But I think what people need to know is when we say, look, only 0.4% of activity within the crypto space is illicit or criminal activity, that doesn't mean that we shouldn't do anything about the 45 billion. And that 45 billion, 33% of that activity involves sanctions, 24%, over 10 billion involves scams and fraud. North Korea continues to attack the crypto ecosystem at speed and scale that we really haven't seen before. About 800 million this year, and billions over the last 5 years. So the volume is going down. It's about 0.4%, but obviously there's still issues that we need to tackle.
Now, you say in the summary of the report, and I should have mentioned that up front, the full report will be out in a few weeks. And on the fraud space, you have that the fraud-related inflows dropped by 40%, but still remain high. And then a note there says fraud is notoriously underreported. So in reality, this number is much higher. Why is that it's underreported? Is it because people that are impacted feel reluctant to report? What's your take on that?
It's a great question and something I made sure to put in here because we really want people to understand that. I've seen reporting that only about 15% of fraud and scams are reported. We have built the largest database of fraud and scam reporting. It's called Chain Abuse, and we're still seeing, and it has hundreds of thousands of reports, but we're still only seeing a fraction of those that occur reported. So it's really important to know that the 10 billion is a high number. It's too high, but we're probably talking magnitudes larger when it comes to scams and fraud in particular. As we all know, in this sort of age of pig butchering and romance scams, people are embarrassed to be victims and are just not coming forward. So the reality is that our 10 billion is probably much higher because they're just this is a famously underreported category.
Now, another space that's very important to our world is terrorist financing. And, going forward, that's going to continue to challenge all of us. We're going to ask you in a little bit about a couple of the executive orders that relate to crypto, but one of the other executive orders, I think you also commented on this, identified drug cartels will be identified as foreign terrorist organizations going forward. We actually brought this up in a webinar we did earlier this week where I asked IRSCI what their take was from what's the practical impact of that. And they said they're still trying to identify that. But obviously, as you add groups as FTOs, the challenge for financial institutions is to continue to be vigilant regarding identifying terrorist financing. So talk a bit about what your report identified in that category.
Yeah, really, really important question. I think what we've seen over the last few years, and it's harder to quantify than in some other areas, but something that we've seen is terrorist organizations, most notably the Islamic State in Khorasan province, ISKP, has increasingly relied on crypto to fund operations, receive donations, and conduct attacks. Again, we're not seeing this at scale. We're not seeing this as the number one driver of terror financing, but we're seeing in 2024, especially, and we'll continue to see this, terrorist organizations continue to experiment with crypto. We've seen some fundraising from sort of Hamas-related entities, but have not seen, again, that it done at scale. It's something that we continue to monitor very, very closely. Again, ISKP, if you're thinking about groups, is probably the one that's become the most forward-leaning here. But it's something we're looking at very, very closely, and we talk about in this teaser, and then also in more depth in the report. What on the cartel piece, it's really important. And when I was a prosecutor, I did spend a lot of time on terror financing, and one of the tools that we had as law enforcement is we could charge anyone who supports or provides any type of support to a terrorist organization with providing material support to terrorists. And we'll now be able to use those types of charges for cartels now that they've been designated as FTOs. And that becomes very powerful. We're talking 15, 20-year sentences for someone sending aid or providing support to cartels. It also really kind of unleashes the U.S. national security tools to go after these groups. So we're not just talking, law enforcement cases anymore, putting handcuffs on people. We're also talking, the full power of the Department of Defense and the intelligence community. And it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. We've used those authorities to go after bad actors in places like Syria, where we'll do drone strikes, right? The question is whether or not we'll do that in places like Mexico. So a lot of I think a lot of open questions there. But what this does is opens up a lot of authorities for law enforcement and national security agencies.
Was sort of the parallel in the early days of the money laundering statutes. We would continue to add predicate offenses for partially the same reason, right? To give prosecutors more tools, because if you could add a money laundering charge, obviously it's lengthier prison terms and dollar penalties and that sort of thing. So a little different, but parallel. So
Absolutely.
Another reason why. Talk also in the cyber security world in terms of your report, ransomware and hacks and those sorts of things, what your folks were able to identify there.
Yeah, absolutely. 2024 was essentially a record year for hacks. We saw about 2.2 billion was stolen, a 17% increase from 2023. North Korea, in our very conservative number, I think we're very conservative when it comes to associating hacks with North Korea. You want to be right on those 100% of the time. We see about 800 million stolen. It's probably a little bit more than that. So we're still seeing bad actors attack the cryptocurrency ecosystem, really unprecedented speed and scale. And it was a record year for ransomware. We saw 5,635 publicly reported attacks. That's, again, a record and an increase from 2023. We saw a $75 million payment, which was a record, which was made to the Dark Angels ransomware group in March of 2024. So ransomware continues to be an issue, as do hacks. I think one thing that I continue to come back to is the need, as we build, cryptocurrency businesses, financial institutions in this space, cybersecurity is critical infrastructure. I want to, at TRM, we track and trace the flow of funds, right? We're working with law enforcement to build investigations. At the end of the day, we're not going to trace our way out of these. the key is going to be to build harden our cyber defenses against these types of attacks from happening in the first place. And hopefully you have to use blockchain intelligence on the back end less. And we'll kind of see how that plays out. But again, two really important trends to mention from 2024.
Before we move on, anything else from the report that you want to highlight? Like I said, this is obviously a summary of the report, so the key findings. But to drill down, folks will have to wait for your company to issue the whole report in a few weeks.
No, I really appreciate us being able to go through it in this way, and excited to release the report to the world. I think one other thing just to mention, just because you mentioned the cartels, is we are seeing some activity there. Cryptocurrency-enabled online sales of illicit drugs saw a year-on-year growth of over 20% between 2023 and 2024, about 2.4 billion in US dollars. So there's no question that darknet markets and cartels and others are attempting to use cryptocurrency, and we're continuing to monitor that very closely.
The other thing that we mentioned up the beginning of our conversation was obviously we are in a new administration, and when you have any new administration, there's always an opportunity to figure out what's going to be the priorities, what are some of the issues. And I think regardless of where you sit on any side of this administration, they've been very active in the first week, extremely active, probably more active than any I've seen almost in my lifetime. But let's talk about a couple of things that are relevant to our world, the broad-based financial crime and crypto world. One is the executive order that was signed. I know you've commented on that. Talk a bit about what it is, both overview, but also from a practical standpoint, what you think it, what direction it can go. And then I know that you've also just posted when we recorded this, the day we're recording, you posted an open letter to the working group that was created. So I wanted you to talk about that as well. But first, talk about the executive order, what it is, and from your perspective, what it's not, I guess, because some of these orders are very specific. Others are sort of goal-oriented. And so I'm very curious of your view on that.
No, I appreciate the question. It's been a wild week. I have not slept a lot in the last few days trying to keep track of all of this. But essentially, yes, this week, the Trump administration dropped a really much anticipated executive order on crypto. And it did a number of things. One, it really sort of set out the processes that we're going to see play out over the next year. And that's very typical of an executive order. In fact, the Biden administration executive order in 2022 was very similar in that it kind of laid out the playbook. But this was, quite frankly, a more aggressive and urgent playbook. So what it did is it talked a lot about individual autonomy, which is going to be a priority here. It's, hey, people should have a right to create software that to have self-hosted wallets, to custody digital assets. So really talking a lot about individual autonomy, again, like a theme of this administration, sort of that libertarian streak. Mm-hmm. It talks a lot about the creation of this president's working group that you mentioned, which is chaired by David Sachs, the new crypto and AI czar, but has members from across the interagency, so SEC, CFTC, Treasury, DOJ, and down the line. And that group has really been charged with some very, very tight deadlines of coming up, basically getting together and building out a clear regulatory framework for digital assets. How are they going to collaborate? How are they going to work together to get this done? And include a couple of issues that are sort of very top of mind for folks, to include, should we have a Bitcoin reserve, a stockpile, essentially, and how that should all look. So there's that piece. Finally, they ban the idea, essentially, or order agencies to stop studying a central bank digital currency and instead sort of promote U.S. dollar-backed stable coins as sort of the way to send U.S. soft power out into the world. So there's lots here. I would think I think of this more as sort of a treasure map than the treasure chest, if it makes sense. Like, hey, this is how we're going to ultimately get to clear regulatory policy at the end of the day. But it's not. It can't set that out, and in large part, it can't set that out because ultimately that's going to be up to Congress. So the EO is citing it sets up the work, but now the work needs to be done, essentially.
And you obviously came from Treasury, you're a former prosecutor, not personality wise, but so far, the people that are going to be in roles at Treasury and these other agencies, have they commented? Some have, some have not, I think, on
Yep.
on crypto. Just sir, what do you think? I know you don't know. We won't know for certain until things start, so it's a little unfair. But just in general, how do you is the approach going to be, as you just said, based on how the executive order is crafted, more from a libertarian standpoint? But what do you think? Because as we both know, all these agencies are going to have a role some way in the crypto space. And so, what do you think now, knowing full well that in a month you could change your mind and adjust your views?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I've been getting asked a lot this week, like sort of, hey, what does all of this mean? But the reality is, it started way before this week, right? There's this saying that the people are the policy, and President Trump nominated Paul Atkins to be the chair of the SEC. Paul was a commissioner, very pro-business, understands crypto, has worked in this space. You look at Secretary Bessent at Treasury, who will be coming in, again, like businessman, but sort of very pro-crypto, pro-innovation. And I think, you talk about David Sachs, the PayPal executive, now crypto czar, just the fact that role exists. And it's not that it's crypto only, it's crypto and AI. So I think the reality is, like, the push here, the urgency is to ensure that the U.S. is competitive in this sort of age of technology, in this new internet. We led the world when it came to building the internet. We should be building sort of this new internet of money, this internet of information when it comes to AI. So I think that there's been a lot of focus on that, and I think that the right people are in the right place, and we'll see how all that plays out. Obviously, I'm on your show, which is sort of the anti-money laundering, right? Talking to folks who are in the compliance space. Right. There's not, unlike the Biden EO, there's not much here on AML. But essentially where I land is, that's okay in large part. What we're doing at TRM and in the space, and the folks who are listening, is we're building the security layer for this technology. And the reality is that I think that there's going to be a renewed focus on allowing lawful crypto businesses to build in the US. Those businesses are going to now get some degree of legal regulatory clarity, which is going to cause them to build in a highly regulated environment. And particularly from an anti-money laundering space. I mean, right today, the one thing that's clear to crypto businesses is that you're a money service business. That means you have to have compliance tools in place. That means you have to have policies and procedures. So these are all MSBs, and better to have them built here than, offshore in places that we can't ensure that the controls are in place. So I think we're going to see a lot more businesses build in the US. I think they're going to be compliant. And I think that we're going to see these agencies, whether it's Treasury or DOJ or SEC, focus on actual bad actors, right? We talked about ransomware groups and terrorist financiers and others, as opposed to sort of lawful crypto businesses that are building in the United States.
I don't disagree with any of that. I think the challenge is going to be, we have seen some new and existing members of Congress starting to put BSA in a category of, we need dramatic adjustment and change. Now, I also agree that we do, and I think the AMLO law from a few years ago has begun that process. But I do think there's going to be, we've seen it with the courts, with the Corporate Transparency Act and that issue. So it's going to be interesting to see. I don't disagree with you that there'll be an attempt to make sure that whatever requirements there are for MSBs and others obviously do apply to crypto businesses, and that they should be the same. Let's encourage innovation for licit actors, not illicit actors. So I think that's definitely going to be the theme. This separate issue just could be it could impact it collaterally. So we'll see what happens with that.
I think it'll be interesting. I think you and I we do agree. I think I think we could do a lot better. And I think what's really unique about blockchain technology, right? I mean, is we're able to see on public blockchains every transaction in real time, and are able to track and trace the flow of funds in ways we never could in the traditional financial system, right? What's so interesting is, our BSA framework today is based on, Bank of America, Citi, like regulated institutions sending siloed SARs, suspicious activity reports to their regulator. And the only people who ever see that SAR are essentially the financial institution, the regulator, and maybe law enforcement if they can dig their way through, find the needle in the haystack, right? But what's cool about crypto is using blockchain intelligence tools like TRM and others, regulators are able in real time to watch those financial flows, right? To actually monitor their regulated ecosystem in real time. And I think that there's a lot of opportunity to improve the BSA based on new technology. But,
Right.
man, we know how Congress works. So this all takes time.
Absolutely. But I do agree with you. Let me get you out of here on this. You wrote an open letter today as we were recording, which is to the working group. It also touches on what was going to be my eventual last question is, if you're running things for a day, what do you want to see in terms of crypto guardrails, crypto infrastructure, all that? But talk a bit about your the concepts in your open letter and what you hope to see as a clear practitioner in this space. You obviously one of the earliest experts in this space and continue to be. So we look to you for direction.
No, John, I really appreciate it. I think it's like a two-prong approach, essentially. And that is, I think that we need to provide legal clarity to crypto businesses that want to build here. Look, I'm in the U.S. I'm a U.S. person. I've worked in the U.S. government my whole career. Like, I want to see great things built here. And I want people to stay here who are building great things, right? So the question is, how do we enable that? And I think we enable that by providing regulatory clarity. You should know who your regulator is. You should know what the rules of the road. You should know when you issue a token, whether or not it's a security. And I think we're going to get that. But on the other hand, we need to ensure that there's still a continued focus on actual bad actors. There's no world in which North Korea can steal billions of dollars from the crypto ecosystem. We have to stop that. And they're going to be using it for weapons proliferation, other types of activity. So I think we need to beef up cybersecurity. We need to, continue to rely on blockchain intelligence tools to stop actual bad actors, all the folks that we talk about in that crypto crime report, right? The terrorist financiers, the ransomware groups. So I think it's this two-pronged approach is give lawful businesses the clarity that they need to build here. And on the other hand, continue to go after real bad actors in the space to sort of make this a safer financial system for everybody.
That's a great way to end this. Ari Redbord from TRM Labs, trmlabs.com. They're a company that does blockchain investigations, risk management. Also, obviously, the authors of the Crypto Crime Report. That information is available on their website. Thank you so much for your help here. We really appreciate your time and sharing your insight. Thanks so much.
John, always love talking to you. This is awesome.